Welcome back to the Imperfectionist podcast. My name is David Rendell, and I am your host for this episode. And my question to start us off today is, what is your personality? Maybe you've taken a personality test in the past. You've taken an MBTI, a Myers-Briggs type inventory, and you've got some letters ES, TJ or something like that. Maybe you've taken the DISC assessment and they told you that you're a D, an I, an S, or a C. You're dominant, you're steady, you're conscientious, something like that. Maybe you've taken the Strengths Finder. We've talked about that before on the Imperfectionist podcast, and they told you what your strengths are. That's a little less of a personality test, but there's a lot of them out there. And you've also heard the terms people talk about being an introvert or being an extrovert in sort of normal talk. That's from Myers-Briggs. Introvert, extrovert is the way they measure how sociable you are on the Myers-Briggs personality test. So what is your personality? If you had to describe your personality, how would you describe it? What do you think, personality even is? When I studied psychology in college, we had a whole test called personality theory, and we talked about what personality was. And obviously, that was interesting to me. That's why I studied psychology. So that's my question for you today. And the reason I ask that is because it seems like a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings of what personality actually is, and therefore what their personality is. And so this will probably end up being a series over the next few weeks where we talk about, what is personality, and we dig into the different pieces of it. And today we're going to focus on what your personality is, what actually personality is, and mostly then what it isn't. Because if we think it's something that it's not, that's where the problem sort of starts. And I've talked before about how I do these presentations for logistics officers in the U.S. military, and I was just doing another one of those last week, and I have people take this assessment about their change style, sort of their personality as it relates to change. And there's 4 types. You can be a transformer who likes to create change. You can be an adapter who responds relatively quickly to changes. You can be a preserver who kind of likes to keep things the same, or you can be a restorer who really likes things the way they are and might even kind of like to take it back to the way that things used to be. And so, for example, let's say, and this isn't just related to technology, so let's say when the new iPhone came out, the first one ever, a transformer is a Steve Jobs who, was instrumental in creating the first iPhone. Transformers don't respond to change, they create it. Adapters are sort of in the group where they kind of wait in line, or they're some of the first people to buy the first iPhone, or at least the second version of it. They're early on, early adopters. You've heard that term. So that's what adapters are. Preservers are like, let's wait and see. I don't know that I want a smartphone. I don't know that smartphones are important. My phone works just fine. I don't need to text. I don't need the internet on my phone. I don't need to take pictures, whatever. And then restorers, holy cow, restorers maybe still don't have a smartphone, or never got a smartphone, or didn't until their family bought them one because they couldn't communicate with this family member because they were so far behind when it comes to technology. And so we talk about how all of those styles have advantages when it comes to change, and why we shouldn't try to change other people's change style or try to fix it, but we should recognize the value that they each provide. But I created this little assessment for people to take. And the question they always ask me, which shows a misunderstanding that I want to try to correct today about personality, is someone will raise their hand and they'll say, do you want my work personality or do you want my home personality? And what they mean is I act differently at work than I act at home. I'm a different person almost, or I seem like a different person, or if you were watching me, I'd look like a different person at work and at home. So how do you want me to answer this? Do you want me to answer this the way I am at work? Do you want me to answer this the way that I am at home? And that's the fundamental misunderstanding we're going to talk about today, because your personality is who you are, independent of the situation. And most crucially, your personality is not your behaviors. So, what the person's really saying when they say, I am different at work and I am different at home, what they're really saying is, I behave different at work than I behave at home. I, for example, am very organized at work and I'm not organized at home. So, do you want my work personality? Do you want my home personality? What they're really saying is, do you want me to describe my work behaviors, or do you want me to describe my home behaviors when I answer these questions? Maybe I don't like change when I'm at home, and I resist it actively, but at work, they're paying me money. I don't want to get fired. So I go along to get along, and I'm an adapter at home. I'm an adapter at work, but at home, I'm a preserver. I resist change. I don't even, I still watch VHS tapes, whatever. Uh, so what they're saying is, I am a different person. And the most important thing that we're going to focus on today is you're not. You're acting differently at home than you act at work because those are different places. But your actions are not your personality. So I'm not arguing with them that they act different. You do, and people do, and that's fine. In an ideal world, we call this alignment in the freak factor. You wouldn't act differently in both of those places because you'd work somewhere that valued you for who you actually are, and you'd be able to be yourself at work, and those behaviors would be productive. So that's where we'd like to get to. But if you're not, that's a reality. But your behaviors, I'll say it again, are not your personality. You don't have a work personality and a home personality. You have a personality. It's like saying I have a work body and I have a home body. No, you don't. You bring the same body with you to work that you take home. Just because you act differently at work and you act differently at home doesn't give you a different body because of it. You might wear different clothes, and maybe that's a good analogy. You might wear different clothes in the different places, but the body, I like that, and I just made that up right now. The body that you bring to both of those places is the same body. You might dress it up different. At work, I have to dress it more professional. At home, I dress it more casual. But the underlying body is the same. You don't have stronger muscles at work than you have at home. You might use your muscles more at work. You might use your muscles more at home. Maybe you don't get to use your muscles at all at work and you are very active and athletic at home, whatever. But the body is the same. You have the same body. You just use it potentially in different ways. You have the same body at work. You have the same body at home. You might use it in different ways, and those are behaviors, but your behaviors are not your personality. Okay? Your behaviors are not your personality. So what is your personality? Okay? Your personality is who you really are, regardless of the situation. Now you say, well, how can it be regardless of the situation? Situations have powerful effects on us. That's true, but you still have something underneath, just like your body's the same, whether you're sitting at a computer at work or you're going for a jog at home, you have the same body, even though the situation is very, very different, right? And you have the same underlying personality, regardless of the situation that you're in, even when you choose to behave differently. And unfortunately, sometimes when you choose to behave inconsistently with the personality that you have. Now, that can happen in both directions. Some people work fits their personality perfectly. And at home, they have to kind of fake it till they make it, wear a mask to make their spouse happy, to make their kids happy, whatever, right? Other people, work doesn't fit at all, and then they go home and they get to be themselves. Worst case scenario is work doesn't fit your personality, home doesn't fit your personality, and you never get to be the person that you really are, right? And that's devastating because you're always acting, you're always adjusting, you're always trying to give the people what they want and never get to be who you are. And that's a painful way to live your life. And again, that's another example of the lack of alignment. So What is personality, right? Personality is really simple. It's your preferences for thought and action, right? Primarily, it's your preferences for the way you'd like to live your life, the way you'd like things to be. Do we always get things the way we'd like them to be? No. But our preferences are our personality. So, for example, if I prefer to be by myself, that's called being an introvert. That's the personality term for it. You've probably heard that. If I prefer to be by myself and to work alone and to be independent, and at work, I'm required to work in groups and on teams most of the day, I and I do that, then I have work behaviors that are inconsistent with my personality, right? Now, let's talk about behaviors for a second, because you might say, oh, Dave, so you're saying that since I have an introverted personality and I like to be by myself, then I can't be good at interacting with people. No, that's not what I'm saying. We can learn skills and we can learn behaviors. This is crucial, but we don't learn preferences. I'm going to say it again. We can learn skills and we can learn behaviors, but we don't learn preferences. In other words, you can be an introverted person who's learned how to effectively interact with other people, even though you don't like it. You're still good at it and you do it just fine, but it ends up exhausting you and taking a lot out of you, and you need to recover by acting like an introvert, relaxing, recharging, quiet, peace, etc. Right? So it's not that personality doesn't matter. You can learn the skills, you can learn the behaviors, but you don't learn the preference. The preference is your preference. We'll talk about how you get there in a future episode. Where do these preferences come from? But for now, we need to understand what it is, and what it is preferences. Some people prefer to be by themselves, introvert. Some people prefer to be with others, extrovert. And you can either have behaviors that are consistent or inconsistent with those preferences, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn the behavior. It's just that the behavior has consequences, right? The behavior has consequences. We'll talk about those consequences in another episode. Basically, we have more confidence and we have more energy when we behave consistently with our personality. We have more confidence and we have more energy when we behave consistently with our personality. So if I have to act like a different person at work every day, that's going to hurt my confidence and lower my energy. If you've ever heard somebody say this job is sucking the life out of me, what they mean is I'm being exhausted by the requirement to behave in ways that are inconsistent with who I am on a regular basis. So our confidence level goes up when we're acting, behaving consistently with our preferences. Our confidence level goes up and our energy level goes up. When I do a presentation, my energy level goes up during the presentation, even though I'm working. Normally, you think you're working, your energy level is going to go down until you're eventually exhausted. That's not necessarily true, because when we act consistently with our preferences, it actually can fuel us. Confidence and energy, we'll do a whole episode on that, are matched with, confidence and energy are tied to your preferences. We don't choose what our preferences are, but we can choose to live a lifestyle or to have work or have behaviors that are consistent with our personality. And that's where your greatest success is going to come from. So your personality isn't your behaviors, it's your preferences. And everything comes from those preferences. Here's the problem. How often do you get to be who you really are? How often do you get to do what you prefer? If you have a full-time job, again, that isn't super consistent with your personality, and you are in a long-term relationship where you live with somebody, and you have children, you probably aren't getting to do exactly what you want to do on any kind of regular basis. which is important because we start to think, well, those preferences don't matter. What just matters is, what does my spouse need from me? What does my partner need from me? What do my kids need from me? What does my boss need from me? And I really am my behaviors. And so my personality doesn't matter. My preferences don't matter. I just need to do what people need from me, and that's success. But again, when what you do is inconsistent with who you are, that will not be success, because you'll feel a lack of fulfillment, a lack of meaning, and you'll also be very, very tired and very, very frustrated because your preferences matter. Imagine if you prefer to eat cheeseburgers, and every day somebody makes you eat a salad. That doesn't change the fact that you'd prefer to eat a cheeseburger. In fact, every day you go eating a salad and not getting a cheeseburger, the more and more frustrated you're going to get, and the more and more you're going to start fantasizing about having that cheeseburger. Just because you can make yourself eat that salad doesn't mean you don't prefer to have cheeseburgers. The behaviors are not as important as the underlying preferences. And one of the reasons we don't know what those underlying preferences are and we don't give them enough focus is because no one is asking until the personality test what your preferences are. Imagine if you have 2 or 3 kids, little kids at home, preschool kids at home, and your partner's at home with them all day, and you're at work all day, and you're an introvert, and you prefer quiet, peace, relaxation, time to reflect, and you'd rather not be around a bunch of people. And at work, you're around a bunch of people. It's loud. It's an open office. People are constantly interrupting you, constantly talking to you. There's noise and chaos everywhere. And you ride home on the subway or some kind of public transportation where it's noisy and loud and distracting and frustrating. And when you get home, all you want is some peace and quiet. But your spouse is like, hey, it's your turn to take care of the kids. And your kids are like, hey, play with me. And your kids are like, hey, let's do something. Right? Imagine stopping everybody in that moment and going, well, what I would really prefer is if everybody would leave me alone and give me some time to myself. Most people wouldn't do that because they know no one cares about your preferences in that moment. Now, I would argue that in a healthy long-term relationship, you and your spouse or your partner need to get clear about those preferences, and you do need to give each other time. That isn't unrealistic. Now, it might not be the moment you get home, but that person might know, if I can get you an hour to yourself when you get home, then you can recharge and then get your strength. It's kind of like taking a nap. If I can give you a chance to sleep, then I know you can come back stronger. I know for me, if I can take a nap in the middle of the day, sometimes I can be more productive at the end of the day. I'm not being less productive by giving myself a break. I'm being more productive by taking a break in the short term so I can be more productive in the long term. So in a long-term healthy relationship, I think these are exactly the kinds of conversations you should be having. And you can start teaching your kids about their personality. You can start respecting their preferences. You can teach your kids, even I think as they get older, about your personality and your preferences, and help them understand you better as a human being. And I think that's a healthy way to start building adult relationships with your children as they grow older. But in most of our lives, people aren't having these kinds of discussions on a regular basis. And therefore, we sometimes don't even know what our preferences are. If someone's been working a tough job for 20 years, and they've been in a okay relationship for 20 years, and they've had kids for 15 of those 20 years, it might have been so long. And maybe even growing up, the teachers I had, the parents I had, they didn't ask me about my personality. And if anything, and this is this is where this whole podcast comes from, the Imperfectionist podcast. If anything, we're used to being told that our preferences are wrong and bad. Oh, you want to be by yourself? Well, effective people know how to communicate with others, and they get out there and they interact with people. So stop spending so much time in your room and go out there and interact with others. You might have got that message when you were a kid. Here's what's hilarious. If you were a kid who was always doing things with others, sooner or later, your parents would go, you know what? Good people know how to be alone and be quiet and be to themselves. So maybe you shouldn't be around people all the time, and you should learn to value solitude. If you're really active, people want you to slow it down. If you're going slow, people want you to speed it up. It's very hard to find that spot where people are giving you the thumbs up, and that's why we think it's important to be well balanced and well rounded. and kind of do a little bit of everything, which kind of means having no preferences. I can do whatever, and I can be successful doing whatever. And I don't need to be alone, but I don't need to be with other people. And I don't, right? And that's not success either. And so not only can we kind of lose our preferences because no one's asking and no one cares. And in fact, people might literally be fighting us on our preferences. I'm going to say that again. One of the reasons we don't know what our preferences are, and therefore we don't know what our personality is because not only are people not asking most of the time, even if they did ask, once they found out if it was inconsistent with what they wanted from you, then they just want you to behave the way they want to behave. Oh, well, that's the classic suck it up, figure it out, have self-discipline, have self-control, delay gratification, and do it this way, even though you don't want to, because that's what good people do and that's what strong people do. And like I said, over time, that has a huge cost. And one of the big costs is we literally, and you've heard people say this, right? You can lose yourself. You lose yourself. You can literally forget who you are. You hear people say they've lost themselves, they've gotten lost, and you also hear people say, I need to get away to find myself. One of the reasons you oftentimes need to get away to find yourself is because all of those external pressures to behave in ways that other people want from you distract you from or confuse you as you try to understand, what are my preferences? And if you went from living with your parents to living with someone else to having children, there might have been no period of time where you really said, well, who am I? And if I could do, so here's the personality question. Here's how you get to preferences. If I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, what would I do? So for example, when people ask you, do you want to come to this party? Personality says, understanding your personality, self-awareness says, well, do I generally enjoy parties? And do I like being out with other people? And am I energized by large groups and by music and by dancing and by activity? Or do I prefer quiet and solitude, etc.? Right? And then you say, no, thanks, the party isn't for me. Or you say, yeah, I'd love to go to the party. I'd love to go to the party. I prefer parties. So thank you for the opportunity to do something that's consistent with my personality. Now, you don't have to say that or you're going to get uninvited from the party because they're going to be like, hey, you sound super weird. I don't know why you said it that way. I just thought you might enjoy the party. I wasn't asking you about your personality, right? And this even happens with friends. This isn't about marriages. This isn't about kids, right? The reason some people act inconsistently with their personality and don't know what their preferences are is, for example, when they were in high school, they wanted to do stuff, but the cool kids weren't doing that. Their friends were pressuring them to go out a lot or stay in a lot or whatever it happens to be, to like things they didn't like, right? So the real lesson here is, personality is preferences, not behaviors. The difficulty then in understanding our personality is understanding our preferences in a world that largely doesn't ask us what our preferences are. And then even if it does, you take a personality test at work and it says you're pretty introverted, then what those tests love to do is go, you're going to need to figure out how to act more extroverted then, because that's kind of what we need from you around here. Your personality comes out that you really prefer to have a clear plan when you're working on things. And they tell you at work, we really need you to be flexible and adaptable. And I can't always prepare for everything. So we just need you to be kind of ready for anything. Well, then why did we even, and it's a good question to ask, right? And that's why we call this the Imperfectionist Podcast. Why did we even talk about what my preferences were? Because that's what it is when we ask you your personality, when all you were going to do is tell me what you wanted from me anyway, regardless of how consistent or inconsistent it was with my personality. Now, what great companies do is they help people in that process of matching. So if you're looking for a job, you're looking for a career, or you're looking to change your jobs or change your careers, that's what you're looking for. Is this a company that genuinely cares whether or not the work they ask me to do connects with the personality that I actually have? But a lot of employers misunderstand this personality thing, and all they do is say, what's your personality? You answer the questions. Well, here's the thing. A lot of people don't even answer those accurately because they try to answer the personality test the way they think their company wants them to. In other words, who does the company wish I was? And let me say that so they'll let me keep my job here. Do you see how unproductive that is? I can't tell them what my real preferences are because I don't think my preferences are what they want from me. Okay? So the reason this is challenging is because work personality, home personality, if it's our behaviors, it's easy to just go, well, am I organized? I don't know. Let's look. Do I act organized at work? Do I act organized at home? If I do, I must be organized. Okay. Do I prefer to be organized? That's a harder question. If I could do whatever I wanted at work, would I put together more files and would I organize my desktop and would I sort my emails and would I stack my papers in a certain way and would I plan my time in a detailed kind of way? At home, if I was single and living on my own with not even any roommates, would I wash the dishes every day? How often would I clean? Would I fold and put away my clothes in a certain way? Would I hang up my stuff in an organized fashion? Would I manage my bills and my papers in an organized way? I don't know. My partner or my roommate gets really mad when I don't, so I wash the dishes on a certain schedule, but not because I prefer to, but because I don't want to bother them, right? So it's easier to look at our behaviors than to look at our preferences. Our preferences are more invisible, and other people sort of conspire, not I don't think deliberately, but or consciously. They just know they want from you what they want from you, and so they're going to push you to behave in ways that make them happy. Now you're doing the same, and that's something that I think we need to get better at, and something that I want to help with on this podcast is how can we be in relationships at work and at home where we give people the freedom. I've talked about this with Stosh in the past when he was a guest on the show. Give people permission to really be themselves, and it doesn't matter if you have permission to be yourself if you don't know who you are to begin with. And who you are to begin with at the most basic level is, how would you prefer your life to be if it could be exactly the way you wanted it to be? Now, another reason that we struggle to think about that is when people go, that's unrealistic, that's idealistic, and why would I set myself up for frustration and disappointment by thinking about those kinds of things? Now, that's tough because that's pretty negative and pretty pessimistic to say that, because that assumes you can't do anything to make your life to be a better fit, a better match for who you are. And that's what I think we can do. And I talk about that. We've talked about that before. We call that alignment, finding the right fit between who you are and where you are, between who you are and what you do. The more those things are in alignment, the more happy and successful that you're going to be. And the more you can help other people do that, the more happy and successful they're going to be. So personality is preferences. It's not behaviors. We don't have a separate personality at work and a separate personality at home, just like we don't have a separate body for work and we don't have a separate body at home. But one way to figure out what your preferences are is to try to find situations where you are in control or mostly in control with the way things go. So I'll give you a simple example. One way to understand your personality is when all of those external restrictions from family, friends, work are removed, how do you behave? So let me give you a simple scenario related to being an introvert or an extrovert. So again, just to be clear, introverts are introverts sort of on two levels. Introverts tend to like to be alone or with less people, close people that they have close relationships with, and not very many of them. So a few really close friends and potentially family members, or being alone completely. Stronger extroverts, people have a stronger preference for extroversion, tend to like to be around more people and people they don't know as well. Strangers are sort of interesting and exciting to people who are strong extroverts. The other level with introversion and extroversion is activity level. So introverts tend to prefer a lower activity level. Again, prefer a lower activity level. So if you say to them, what do you want to do on vacation? They go toes in the sand, beach chair, sit by the pool, that kind of thing, read a book. That's an introvert sort of answer. Extroverts, paddleboard, surfing, golfing, running, party, dinner, etc. Let's go, let's do. Introverts, let's stay, let's relax. Okay. So people and activities are sort of two ways that you can measure introversion and extroversion. So let's imagine a scenario. Assume you have a 9 to 5 job and assume you have people you live with at home, right? It could be family, roommates, however, it doesn't matter. And let's assume you have a 9 to 5 job where you have the weekends off, right? 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you have the weekends off. So you come home on Friday night expecting your roommates, your spouse, your kids to be there, and they're not. And you see a note or you see a text from them saying, we went away to go visit wherever for the weekend. Enjoy. Okay. So now you're in a situation where for Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday until they return, you can do what you want. You can go out with people. You can stay home by yourself. So this is one way to start understanding your personality is all the restrictions aren't completely gone, right? If you have a rager party and you destroy the house and the fire starts and when your partner comes home, there's, naked people sleeping on the couch and people have thrown up everywhere and there's holes in the walls, right? There's limits, right? But the restrictions have been removed pretty significantly. And you have a tremendous amount of freedom of what you do as it relates to, do you want to be by yourself and relax and not do very much? Or do you want to get other people involved and do a bunch of stuff? And so that can help you see your preferences because in that moment, you get to do what you prefer. It's kind of like eating a meal by yourself. If you're with somebody else, you might feel like you want to eat healthy so they don't make fun of you for how much you ate, or you might enjoy some kind of weird food, or you might know they don't like that food or how it smells, or they think it's gross, or they don't like to look at it. I remember I ate lobster one time with my wife, and it was one where you had the whole lobster and you're like ripping it apart. And she kind of set up the menus so she didn't have to look at it. I don't tend to eat, seafood like that around my wife because she doesn't like it. And so, for example, when I travel for speaking, I tend to have the kind of seafood I wouldn't have when my wife's around because I don't want to bother her. And now I'm doing what I prefer because it's not going to bother somebody else, right? Now, that also says something about your personality is whether or not you care what anybody else wants or doesn't want. We'll get to that in a minute when we talk about strong preferences and weak preferences. So you're back in the scenario. So close your eyes. It's Friday night. It's 6:00, and you're at home wherever you live, and no one else is there, and no one cares. Again, I'm not telling you to have an affair or something like that, or start doing drugs. Nobody cares what you do. They don't care if you're active and hanging out with other people. They don't care if you're quiet and calm and to yourself for the next 48 hours. What do? Are you excited because you can close the blinds, shut off the lights, and have downtime for the next 2 days? And you don't have to see anybody, and you don't have to talk to anybody, and you don't have to go anywhere, and you don't have to do anything? Or are you almost in a little bit of a panic? If you answered the first one, yes to all those first things, you're probably an introvert. If you say, if you're almost in a panic, wait, there's nobody here, I'm going to be completely alone this weekend. And you immediately start texting friends, calling friends, trying to schedule things. And you're kind of pumped about that. If I could find some people, I could go to a concert. There's a game this weekend. Maybe some people could come over and watch the game. Maybe we could go see one of the college games that's going to be going on. Oh, there's this show that we could go to. I've been wanting to see that movie. I wonder if Steve wants to come over. I wonder if Tammy wants to come over. Whatever it happens to be. I could have a barbecue. If you start getting pumped about activities and people, you're probably more of an extrovert. Now, so that's one way to start understanding your personality better is since it's preferences, what do you do when you can do whatever you want? Okay. Now, here's one of the things that some of you are thinking, because people love to say, it doesn't matter. I'm an introvert and an extrovert. I'm an ambivert. I'm an extroverted introvert. Okay. That's a misunderstanding, I think, as well. If you don't care and you say, well, I might spend Friday alone, but by Saturday, I'd start to be interested in hanging out with people. And I might do something with people on Saturday, but I'm happy to spend Sunday morning alone. And maybe I'd go catch a football game with my friends on Sunday afternoon. If you're saying, I prefer a little bit of extroversion and a little bit of introversion, that's fine. What that means is that you don't have a strong preference for introversion. You don't have a strong preference for extroversion. You have a balanced preference for both, which means you don't have a strong personality in that area. In other words, it's not helpful to define you as an introvert or define you as an extrovert, but you're not an introverted extrovert. You're not an extroverted introvert. A good term for it is you're an ambivert. You kind of like them both to the same amount. And if you get too much of the one, you want to go back to the other. If you get too much of the other, you go back to the other one. You want a decent amount of each. And there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, a lot of people would be in that position. But that doesn't make introvert and extrovert irrelevant, because some people are so introverted that they really, really do care. And some people are so extroverted that they really, really do care. The fact that you don't doesn't invalidate the reality of those people, and the fact that there's also people all along that scale that have greater and greater and greater preferences for those things. Another way to understand your preferences is if your personality is strong enough, in other words, your preferences are strong enough, you almost can't behave inconsistently with your personality, because your preference is so strong that you basically have to have it the way you want it. Okay. I have 3 daughters, and they all have pretty strong personalities, meaning they have pretty strong preferences. Now, a lot of times we use strong personality as a way to criticize. That's not what I'm doing here. Strong personality, personality is preference, meaning they have strong preferences for things. So let's just say when it comes to food, I can eat just about anything and I can eat just about anywhere. I don't have any food allergies. I don't have strong preferences when it comes to food. I can eat at just about any kind of restaurant. I don't care if I just had a burger. I can have another burger. I don't care if I just had chicken. I can have chicken again. I don't care, whatever. I'm sort of down for anything. I don't have a strong preference when it comes to food. I like things, and I like some things more than others, but there's very few things that I hate, and there's very few things that I have to have or I get upset. So here's how this works in relationships. Since my preference is lower, meaning my preferences aren't as strong as my daughters are, then when I'm traveling with them or I'm with them, I'll say, where do you want to eat? There'll only be 1 or 2 places that they feel like would be good for them. And then I go there and I figure out what to eat, and they get to have what they prefer. And I'm fine because I don't care that much, right? That's not an absence of a personality. That is, your personality is that you don't have a strong preference in that area. And that's an important thing to understand, because you have a natural flexibility. Unfortunately, we teach people that's where they should be all the time. Don't have strong preferences, don't have strong needs for things to be in a certain way, be adaptable and flexible to whatever else is going on in the world. And I think that's unfair, because we do have those preferences, but it doesn't invalidate the fact that people have strong preferences as they move out towards the edges, just because you don't in a particular way. Another one is that, and you'll see this in friendships a lot, is some people have a strong preference for planning, and other people have a strong preference for kind of not planning, going with the flow, things like that. So, for example, when I ask my daughter, who lives about an hour and a half away and just recently graduated from college, if she wants to watch the Packers game with me. I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, and so is she, and she's my only daughter who cares about football at all. And it's a way to hang out with her sometimes on Sundays when she's not busy with used to be school and now with work. If she says yes, we're going to share a Google Calendar invite where we block out the time. We plan ahead what time I'm going to get there. She agrees to the calendar invite. It's on both of our calendars. We get orders from her roommates for some kind of food they want me to either bring or pick up along the way. And we create this sort of agreement that we're going to meet at this time and do this thing and do it in this way, right? That's a very planned and structured way to handle your leisure time. And I understand that. So we both have stronger preferences for planning. We have planning personalities. We're more structured when it comes to managing our time. My that same daughter used to do an online high school from home through a university. So she was home all day. I was home all day because I work from home. And some days I'd say things like, hey, do you want to play some ping pong? Because we like to play ping pong together. And she'd be like, it's not really on my list, right? She had a plan for the day, and playing ping pong wasn't on the list, and she wasn't just going to throw away the plan she had to play ping pong with me. It doesn't mean she doesn't love me. It doesn't mean she doesn't like to play ping pong with me. It means she doesn't like to change her plans unnecessarily. So then she'd say, what if we put it on the list for tomorrow? And then I knew we were going to play ping pong. She knew we were going to play ping pong. And then we'd end up playing ping pong. Now, again, some of you may be like, wow, that's a high level of structure. And it is. And so then that's another thing that matters. So I have a above average desire to plan and to have structure. She has a preference that's even stronger than that. Okay. So I'm a little more comfortable being flexible than she is, but I'm less comfortable being flexible than other people are. So you've all heard like, hey, go with the flow. So one of my favorite things about that again illustrates my personality is I saw this meme online that says like, yeah, I like to go with the flow. I just want to know a few things like when does the flow start? What's the parking situation at the flow? How long will we be at the flow? Do we have reservations for the flow? Do we have any backup reservations if things don't work out at the flow? When's the flow going to end? Who else is going to be at the flow? Right. And now you get to start to see that if you're like that, some people might be resistant to your preference. Again, right? That's what a go with the flow is. That's someone giving you advice that you shouldn't be such a planner. You should be able to just get along with and go along with whatever's happening. And that's why it's so hard to focus on our preferences. But hopefully that's starting to illustrate what some of your preferences are. When you look at memes and you look at videos online, do you see people kind of dividing people up into two kinds of groups? And you start to go, oh yeah, I really do like things to be like that. And I kind of really does. So here's another way to know your preferences. What bothers you and what frustrates you when other people do things a certain way? So I like to walk fairly quickly and get where I'm going fairly quickly if I'm driving. And when I'm walking in public, I want you to walk quickly, and I don't want you veering, and I don't want you slowing down, and I want you walking with a purpose, and I want you to know that there's other people in the situation because I'm also like that. And when you don't, it frustrates me. I prefer it when people move quickly and efficiently, and I get frustrated when they don't. Other people prefer to go slowly and in a relaxed way and be able to do whatever they want and not be affected by the people around them. And they wish everybody was doing that and nobody was in a hurry and nobody was bothering them and rushing them. Those are preferences, right? And so the sum total of all your different preferences, when you do a personality test and it's asking you different questions, all it is categorization of preferences. Introvert, extrovert is, do you prefer a lot of activity? And a lot of people, or do you prefer less people and less activity? It takes the category of activity level and number of people you don't know, and it puts them on a scale. Right? And so that's another important thing about behavior and preferences. It's not do you prefer it or don't you, it's how much do you prefer it. Think about a scale like from 0 to 100. How much do you prefer to have things that way? And the more you prefer it, the stronger your personality is and the less interested you are in things going the opposite way. So the most important parts of your personality are where you have the strongest preferences, because that means you actually might even dislike or hate doing things the other way, which then starts to look to other people like an imperfection or a weakness because you're unwilling to adapt and adjust to doing things the way other people want you to. And then they're going to use the shame of you should and you shouldn't and what's wrong with you and you need to grow up and you need to mature and you need to be flexible and you don't always get to have things the way you want to try to get you to behave in the way that they want you to. So you can think about things starting in the middle. I have no preference for, let's say, introvert, extrovert. I have a slight preference for either introvert or extrovert. I have a moderate preference for introvert, moderate preference for extrovert, or I have a strong or extreme preference. And again, once it's a strong preference, it's almost a need, right? It's not a desire anymore. It's a need. I need it to be that way. And you've met people like that. They almost can't be alone. They're so extroverted, or they almost can't be with other people because they're so introverted, or they really, really don't want to, and they try to get out of it as quickly as possible. And usually those people marry each other when they're opposites like that, and then they spend all that time frustrated with each other. So I'll end with one last example. I said this earlier. You can learn behaviors, but you can't learn preferences. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So I was talking to this guy one time, and I think I've told this story before, but I'm going to keep telling it because it illustrates it so perfectly. He told me that when he has a bad day, he likes to go home, pour a glass of wine, sit down in his favorite chair, get out his laptop, open it up, and fire up some Excel spreadsheets. The way he soothes himself, the way he calms down, is by organizing things in Excel spreadsheets. A lot of people have to do Excel for work. They have Excel behaviors, and they might even excel in those behaviors. They might be getting an A+ at school in their Excel class, or they might be getting performance. They might be getting performance raises and getting promotions at work for their work in Excel. But it doesn't feed their soul. They're behaving effectively even with Excel, but it doesn't fuel their soul like it does with the guy who goes home and does it to relax, right? When he gets to do what he prefers to do Excel, and then he gets paid to do it at work. Can you see how that could be an advantage? But can you also see the difference? So here's the crucial thing about behaviors versus preferences. I can teach you to be better at Excel, but I cannot teach you to prefer to do Excel. And this is why personality matters. No one can train your personality. Nobody can train your preferences. We're going to talk about where they come from in a future episode. I think it's mostly genetic and hardwired and things like that. You also don't need to change it because there's nothing wrong with it. And having a different personality, even if you could train it, isn't going to make you better. It's just going to make you different. We're going to talk about that in another episode, about how personality is relatively stable over time. So this is another way that you can start to learn more about your personality, as well, is what are those things I do voluntarily and I get confidence and energy from them. We're going to do a whole episode on that. What are the things where you get confidence and energy? And what are the things where your confidence and energy goes down? That means you don't have a preference for that activity. And again, or that your preference is so strong in the opposite way, you might actually dislike or hate that particular activity because it takes your energy down and it takes your confidence down, reduces your confidence, right? So you can learn new skills, but that doesn't change your preferences. I can teach you how to run more effectively. I can teach you how to run farther. I can teach you how to lift weights. But that doesn't make you enjoy physical activity. It doesn't make you enjoy being outside. It doesn't make you enjoy a big challenge. It doesn't make you enjoy movement. Nobody can change your preferences. You can't change your preferences. Now, you can discover that you like something you didn't think you'd like. You can discover something that you like that you didn't know you liked, but that's not creating a preference. That's just a discovery, and we should all go through that process. I think we should experiment in our lives and try things out until we know well enough what our preferences are, and then we say, I don't prefer that, I do prefer this, and in general I'm going to try to act consistently with my personality because my confidence and energy go up when I behave in ways that are consistent with my personality. So this is part one of what's probably going to be a multi-part series. I might not do it exactly in order, although you can give me some feedback if you're in a hurry to hear the next version of this, or I have some other stuff that I want to talk about in the next episode. Joe Whale, who we've talked about before, has a new deal with Marks and Spencer, which is a huge department store chain in the UK. So that's not a flash in the pan. Oh, Joe had a little bit of success, and it was interesting that he doodled a little bit. Joe Whale is still doing great with his doodling. We talked about him in the past. If you want to check out past episodes, if you don't remember that story, my friend Mike Bazaar has sent me a couple of pink goldfish stories, a company called Decked, and a company called Unnecessary Necessities that we're going to talk about in the next episode. And Nebraska came up with the slogan, "Honestly, it's not for everyone." And it went great. And now it's been a few years and they're getting significant resistance. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened in Nebraska as well. So we're going to talk about that on a future episode, but maybe we'll go straight to the next version of personality. So here's what I want you to remember as we wrap this one up. You don't have a work personality. You don't have a home personality. You have work behaviors. You have home behaviors. You don't have a friend personality and a home personality. You might behave a certain way with your friends because you're trying to get along or because you're trying to be likable or you're trying to be accepted. But again, a great lesson is if you have to fake it to be liked and accepted by people, then they may not really be your friends in the first place. And maybe you should find people who are more consistent. But again, oftentimes we think of that as self-development. And that's why we call this the Imperfectionist podcast. Self-development is not changing your behaviors to match other people's expectations. It's finding friends and finding work and finding intimate relationships that match your personality so you can bring your best, and that what you don't have is irrelevant because it's not necessary in that relationship or in that work. So remember, you don't have a work personality. You don't have a home personality. What you have is work behaviors and home behaviors. And in an ideal world, we match our personality to our behaviors. That's when we're the happiest. That's when we're the most fulfilled. That's when we have the most confidence. And that's when we have the most energy. And one of the most common reasons that people say there's something wrong with our personality, or they say there's something wrong with us, they talk about our imperfections, is because they're focused on something they want from us that doesn't match who we are. We don't need to change who we are. We need to change where we are. We don't need to change who we are. We need to change what we're doing to make sure that those things are consistent. That's called alignment. So this has been the Imperfectionist podcast. My name is David Rendell. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, on our next episode, I'll be giving you some comments that I've gotten from people. The Decked story and the Unnecessary Necessity story both came from Mike Bazaar, who's a IT business owner in Texas, and he's got some other stories I'd like to tell you about him. So I got those recently from him. I'd like to share this from you. If you have comments, if you have questions, if you want to argue with me or yell at me and tell me that we do have work personalities, or ask me questions and clarifications about what I said today, I'm certainly open to that because there's a lot of different perspectives on what personality is. And I'm hoping to share my perspective, and I hope that's helpful for you. But I certainly don't expect you to change everything that you believe from one 53-minute podcast. So looking forward to talking with you again next week. Have a great day. Have a great night. Wherever you are, I'm David Rendell, and this is the Imperfectionist Podcast.